Good afternoon. So let's go back to the 9 similes from the Vajra Sutra that I've been talking about sometimes. So the next one of the 9 similes is bubbles. So remember when we were kids playing with bubbles? We blew them from bubble wands and then we would chase them, try to catch them, touch them, and then they would burst and disappear in thin air. Or we jump into a bathtub full of bubbles from bubble bath and play with the bubbles. So I think we find them fascinating because they appear so real and big and solid and beautiful, but that's an illusion because in just a fraction of a moment they vanish and become nothing. Well, not really nothing. It's just that the particles that made up the bubble disperse and go elsewhere, and the bubble itself is not there anymore. So bubbles are a good analogy for the impermanent, insubstantial nature of the things in the world, both animate beings and also inanimate things. So all of these things at one point in time appear very real and is as if they could last forever. But then at another point in time, they crumble, fall apart, die, and cease to exist. So in the Pali Canon, used in the Theravada tradition, the Buddha used bubbles as an analogy for feelings. So there's a famous verse in which he goes through the 5 aggregates that make up a person, and then he compares each of the 5 aggregates to something that is something we find in nature, but something that's transient and insubstantial. So for the feeling aggregate, he used bubbles. So right now, feelings are running quite high for many people because of events in our country and events in the world. And of course, there's always our own personal stuff. And some of these feelings have a valid base, at least in conventional reality. Feelings of sadness and outrage about some of the things that have happened, violence, abuse, injustice, inequality. But we do have to be careful about what we do with our feelings. We can get carried away by them and then end up doing things or saying things that might just exacerbate problems rather than solve them. And we might create negative karma as well, which would bring more suffering for ourselves in the future. So we do need to be careful and try to channel the energy that's involved with those emotions into actions that are constructive rather than destructive. So one way we can do this is to look at the impermanent and insubstantial nature of feelings, just as the Buddha was saying, that they are like bubbles. So they are just states of mind, and mind itself isn't something solid or physical. It's just insubstantial or formless, we say, immaterial. They are mental factors, just factors in the mind, not solid, and they can be also compared to clouds that go through the sky. They come and they go and then they disappear. And in fact, feelings last only a moment before they disappear and then turn into the next moment of feeling. So they're very insubstantial and transient. Also, feelings are dependent on many different factors, causes and conditions, and therefore they are not self-arising or self-creating, as is the case with bubbles. A bubble doesn't say, I'm going to come into existence, and then it creates itself. But instead, when the causes and conditions are there, the bubble arises. So it's similar with feelings. They arise without choice, without willing themselves to arise, and also without our deciding to feel a certain way. I'm sure nobody ever decides when they wake up in the morning that they're going to be sad today. They're going to feel bad. I don't think anybody wants that. But it just happens without choice. So it can be a helpful exercise to explore What are the causes and conditions that give rise to whatever feeling we notice in our mind, especially the disturbing ones? We'll probably discover there's many, many factors. Some are external, events in the world and things that other people are doing and saying, and also internal factors, our own experiences in the past, our family, our conditioning. And Buddhism adds to that karma. If you can believe in that, we carry with us karma from past lives, which is one of the main factors, according to Buddhism, that determines what kind of feelings we have. So if we look at feelings in this way, as arising from many, many factors, causes and conditions, this can help take away some of the apparent strength, solidity, and permanence, which they don't really have. Actually, I want to mention there is a difference between the way we use the word feeling in ordinary English and the way it's used in Buddhism. So in English, it's almost synonymous with emotion. Yeah, any kind of emotion can be referred to as a feeling. But in Buddhism, there are only three kinds of feelings: pleasant feeling, unpleasant feeling, and neutral feeling. And one of those three occurs with every single experience that we have, every moment, with any of our six senses. When we see something, or hear something, or smell, or taste, or feel something in our body, or have something in our mind like a thought or a memory. So with every one of these experiences, there's one of those three feelings: pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So they're the initial or the basic way that our mind reacts to things. But they can lead to emotions, especially pleasant feeling usually leads to attachment. I want more of that. Unpleasant feelings can lead to anger, aversion, or fear. I want to get away from that or destroy that. So we do have to be careful about our feelings. They're very important in our experience. And there's nothing wrong with feelings themselves. Even a Buddha has feelings. But in ordinary beings like me, and maybe some of you as well, feelings are influenced by ignorance of reality. Not seeing things in a correct way, but instead seeing things as if they are inherently, truly, independently existing. So, because of that, our feelings are called polluted or contaminated rather than pure. They're not completely pure, but they're contaminated by ignorance. So I'd like to read something from Khenso Jumpa Tekchok, his book, Insight into Emptiness. He says, we ordinary beings think there is a difference between the feelings of pleasure, happiness, or pain, suffering, and neutrality. We believe some feelings are better and more desirable than others. We consider painful feelings as bad and do not like them. We believe that contaminated happiness is really great. However, for an Arya, so again, an Arya is someone who has had a direct realization of emptiness. So they see the true nature of things. There's no difference between any of these feelings, that is, contaminated feelings, because they are all unsatisfactory. They're all dukkha, suffering, and they are not desirable in the least. To these beings, the Aryas, who have realized reality directly, there is not enough happiness in cyclic existence to fit on the tip of a needle. So even if we took all the happiness in all the realms and all the beings of samsara, it would be so tiny it wouldn't even, cover the top of a needle. Having abandoned attachment to all cyclic existence and therefore to all the enjoyments of cyclic existence, they do not seek these things and do not derive contaminated happiness from them. For example, when Aryas eat what we consider to be delicious food, which is probably what we're going to be doing very soon, they do not think, wow, this is fantastic, and become attached to it. They simply regard it as temporary happiness and enjoy it as such. While we run around pursuing contaminated pleasure, they see it as useless and would much rather turn their attention to more worthwhile things such as ethical conduct, concentration, bodhicitta, and wisdom. So this might be hard to understand because it's talking about the Four Noble Truths, and specifically the first Noble Truth, true dukkha, true suffering. And I don't have time to explain all of that. But anyway, good to look into the Lam Rim and those teachings to understand what this is talking about. But basically, it means that whatever feelings we have, as long as we're unenlightened beings, even pleasant feelings are unsatisfactory, are dukkha. It's another kind of dukkha, suffering. And our goal as Buddhists is to move beyond this kind of situation that we are in and get to where we no longer have contaminated feelings, but only feelings that are pure and uncontaminated. And to get there, we need to stop taking our feelings so seriously, being attached to them, identifying with them, and even acting on them, which usually just perpetuates our unsatisfactory, unenlightened situation. We just keep going around on the Ferris wheel of samsara. So one way to start moving off the Ferris wheel is to explore feelings and see if we can recognize how they are transient, they come and go like bubbles, how they are insubstantial, not really so solid as they appear. So they're like bubbles. So the analogy of bubbles is quite helpful. But that doesn't mean suppressing our feelings or ignoring them, but rather using our intelligence, our wisdom. So maybe you could imagine having a dialogue with your feelings, like an older, wiser, more mature person talking to an impetuous teenager, who's just really geared up to do things. And just ask things like, so what are you feeling? Why do you feel this way? Are you looking at things realistically or maybe exaggerating things? And what would be a good solution to this situation? If there are problems, what can you do to solve them? So something like that. That's just a suggestion, kind of talking to your own mind. And it's always good to remember the advice given by Shantideva, who says when there's a problem, there's really no reason to be upset about it. If there's something you can do to remedy it, do it. If there's nothing you can do, accept it. And it's similar in the Serenity Prayer, which says, grant me the serenity to accept what can't be changed, the courage to change what can be changed, and the wisdom to know the difference. So these are just some ideas about how we can work with our own feelings and try to increase our intelligence and our wisdom, and work with the energy of our feelings to bring about constructive solutions to problems. And just as a conclusion, I know there are protests, peaceful protests happening in many cities like Washington, D.C. and so on. And I think I can speak for all of us here at the Abbey. We would love to be part of these protests, but because of constraints, we can't just jump on a plane and rush over to Washington. But just to know that we are with you in spirit, if not physically, and really appreciate what you're doing and hope that this momentum keeps going.